Your life is currently being governed by one of 5 levels of emotional discipline. Most of you are trapped at level 1, slaves to your own chemistry, while the elite operate at level 5, Spartan Coldness. The Stoics called this path from reactive to sovereign, the development of the Hegemonikon, the governing faculty of the mind. In a zero-sum world, your reactions are not feelings, they are vulnerabilities. Today we map the progression from victim to sovereign. What I'm about to lay out is a clinical progression, 5 levels. By the end, you'll know exactly where you stand, and you'll know what it costs you to stay there. One more thing before we begin. Level 5 is often mistaken for psychopathy. It isn't. It's the state of Spartan coldness, and once you reach it, you become socially untouchable. I'll show you why that isolation is actually your greatest competitive advantage by the end of this video. Let's start at the bottom, where the masses spend their entire lives. At level 1, there's zero gap between stimulus and reaction. Emotion hits, behavior follows, instantly, automatically, without a single moment of intervention from the mind. This isn't a character flaw, it's a biological default. Cortisol floods the bloodstream. Adrenaline overrides the prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain responsible for planning, judgment, and consequence. This is the classic fight-or-flight response hijacking your entire nervous system. At level 1, your decision-making process has been hijacked by your own chemistry. You're not thinking, you're reacting. And a man who's only reacting isn't in the driver's seat of his own life. Here's what that life looks like. Blown relationship because something was said at the wrong moment and you couldn't hold it long enough to decide whether it mattered. Impulsive decisions, the purchase, the confrontation, the outburst, that felt righteous in the second they happened and catastrophic by morning. Chronic regret. The particular, grinding weight of a man who spends more time cleaning up his own wreckage than building anything new. At level 1, you're perpetually reactive, which means you're perpetually behind. You're always responding to what just happened instead of positioning for what comes next. Think of the person you despise most. If they can make you angry with a single text, they own you. You are their puppet. They pull the string, and you dance. Level 1 isn't just impulsive, it is total surrender of your soul to whoever knows which buttons to push. Here is the cold reality the reactive are too blind to see. People at this level are predictable, and predictable people are exploitable. The Battle of Cannae in 216 BC is the clearest proof. Hannibal positioned his weakest troops at the center as bait during the Second Punic War. He needed the Roman consul Varro to be too angry, too proud, and too reactive to see the trap closing around him. Varro took the bait. He pushed forward with everything he had, and Hannibal's flanks folded around him like a fist. 70,000 Romans died in a single afternoon. Not because the Romans were weaker, because Varro's rage was faster than his judgment. Rage is a tactical liability. The disciplined enemy doesn't need to outfight you. He just needs to make you react before you think. And people are always paying attention. The man at level 1 doesn't know this. He tells himself he's passionate, that he keeps it real, that he doesn't play games or hide what he feels. This is weakness dressed in the language of pride. I keep it real is the story a man tells himself when the honest version, I have no control over my own responses, is too painful to admit. Passion is a strength in a man who can direct it. In a man who can't, it's just an excuse for the damage trail he leaves everywhere he goes. The man at level 1 has never considered that the people around him, the ones who seem calmer, more calculating, more composed, aren't suppressing something. They've built something he doesn't have, and that absence costs him every single day. The reactive think level 2 is progress. It isn't. Level 2 looks like discipline from the outside. It isn't. At level 2, the emotion is felt, fully, intensely, but pushed down. Not processed, not examined, not converted into anything useful, just buried. Held under the surface by sheer force of will, a kind of internal white-knuckling that passes for composure. There's a critical distinction between suppression and control that almost everyone gets wrong. Suppression is a pressure cooker. You're sealing the valve shut. The pressure doesn't disappear, it accumulates. Control is a valve. The pressure is released, directed, converted, managed. One is force applied to contain something. The other is a sovereign system that regulates it. The suppressor doesn't have a valve. He has a lid he's holding down with both hands. Here's what that life looks like. Surface calm. Internal chaos. The person at level 2 is the man who never gets angry. The one who is always measured, always reasonable, always composed in public. And privately, he's rotting. His internal state is a pressure chamber that keeps building. The frustrations never spoken, the betrayals never confronted, the resentments that accumulate like sediment at the bottom of standing water. And eventually, something cracks. Not gradually, not in proportion to the immediate trigger. The level 2 man will hold, and hold, and hold, and then explode over something that objectively doesn't warrant it. A minor inconvenience becomes the incident that detonates months of unresolved pressure. Everyone around him is confused. He's confused. Because from his perspective, it came out of nowhere. It didn't. It came from everywhere, compressed into a single moment. And in between those explosions, the suppression isn't inert, it's corrosive. The level 2 man isn't just holding a lid down. He's being dissolved from the inside by his own acid. The anger he won't express becomes the cynicism he can't turn off. The grief he buried becomes the numbness he can't explain. The body keeps the score, and it never lies. As Bessel van der Kolk documented in The Body Keeps the Score, chronic emotional suppression manifests physically as sustained anxiety, persistent muscle tension, the low-grade hypervigilance of a nervous system living at a managed emergency for years. Suppressed emotion doesn't disappear, it finds another exit. Jaw tension, chronic headaches, the kind of fatigue that sleep doesn't fix. Here's what makes this level insidious from a social standpoint. The suppressor appears composed. His decisions appear rational. He seems like a man in control. But his decisions are still emotionally driven. They've just been delayed. The suppressed anger still influences what he chooses to pursue and what he avoids. The buried resentment still shapes who he trusts and who he cuts off. The emotion is running the operating system. It's just been moved out of sight. Marcus Aurelius dealt with this exact problem. He sat at the apex of the Roman Empire, surrounded by a senate full of men who were incompetent, self-interested, or openly hostile to his goals. He felt frustration. He documented it extensively in the private journals that became meditations. He named it, examined it, held it up to the light of reason. And then he went back to governing. He didn't suppress his frustration with the Senate. He processed it, converting it through writing and reflection into a kind of strategic patience that let him act effectively without being consumed. That's the distinction. Aurelius processed what the suppressor buried. The suppressor doesn't. He believes holding the lid down is the same thing as discipline. It isn't, it's avoidance with better posture. Stop. Look at your last 3 arguments. Were you the architect of those words, or was it the cortisol in your veins? If you can't answer that honestly, you're still at level 1. Pay attention to level 3. It's where the exit begins. Suppression is not sovereignty. It is merely a delayed explosion. To move beyond the pressure cooker of level 2, you must develop the observer's eye of level 3. If you stay at level 2, you will eventually detonate. But level 3 is only the exit, it is not the throne. Pay close attention to level 4 because that is where we stop playing defense and start using your enemy's emotions against them. At level 3, something fundamental shifts. The person can now observe their own emotional state in real time. They feel the pull, the anger rising, the anxiety spreading, the defensive reflex activating. And before the behavior follows, they can name it. Not perfectly, not always, but enough. Enough to create a gap between the stimulus and the response that didn't exist at levels 1 and 2. That gap is everything. This is the first level of actual sovereignty, because sovereignty doesn't mean the absence of emotion. It means the presence of a witness, an observer inside you who can see what is happening before you fully committed to a response. The gap is where power lives. And this isn't philosophy, this is neuroscience. Clinical data confirms that the moment you name an emotion, you physically hijack the amygdala. You move the battle from the primitive limbic system to the rational cortex. The limbic system goes quiet the instant language arrives. This is the foundation of what modern cognitive behavioral therapy calls cognitive reframing, but the Stoics understood it 2,000 years ago. This isn't a metaphor. It is a physical hijacking of your nervous system. I am angry is not just a description. It's an intervention. Here's what life looks like at level 3. Fewer explosions. Not zero, but meaningfully fewer. Better decisions under sustained pressure, because the awareness creates just enough delay to allow judgment to enter. The beginning of genuine self-knowledge. Patterns become visible over time. You start to see the specific triggers that move you, the specific people, the specific types of situations. That visibility is the foundation of everything that comes after. The Spartans understood this earlier than anyone. From age 7, every boy who entered the agoge was trained not to eliminate fear, but to recognize it and act through it. The training wasn't about emotional absence. It was about awareness as a combat tool. They were conditioned to feel the fear response fully and function regardless, not by suppressing it, by learning to see it while it was happening and choosing their action anyway. That's the aware fighter. He feels the fear, he sees it, and he acts through it with precision that the level 1 man, who is consumed by it, and the level 2 man, who is pretending it isn't there, can't access. The internal shift at this level moves from retrospective to real time. At levels 1 and 2, the dominant question is, why did I do that? It's asked after the damage is done, in the quiet aftermath of the explosion, or the slow erosion of the suppressor's patience. At level 3, the question shifts to something else entirely. I see what I'm doing, now what? That's a completely different sentence. It's the difference between a man who is studying his wreckage and a man who is standing in the moment with a choice in front of him. But here's the limitation of level 3. And this is where the uninitiated who consider themselves self-aware get comfortable and stop developing. Awareness without strategy is just self-awareness. It's interesting, it's not dominant. The man who can name his emotions in real time but has no system for what to do with that information is like a man who can read the enemy's signals but can't transmit his own. He knows more than he did. He isn't yet dangerous. The trap of level 3 is mistaking insight for power. Insight is the prerequisite. It's not the destination. Level 4 is where the architecture changes. This is where men become dangerous. At level 4, emotions are no longer just observed. They're analyzed, delayed, and redirected as fuel. This is where we stop watching the fire and start using it to burn down the opposition. The level 3 man can see the emotions. The level 4 man takes that same emotional energy, the cortisol surge, the adrenaline spike, the heat of anger, or the cold of threat, and converts it into deliberate output. He uses the energy without being owned by it. This is controlled explosion. When conflict arrives, the strategic processor doesn't escalate and doesn't suppress. He registers the energy of the situation, holds it for a measured moment, and releases it in the direction of his choosing, with timing and force calculated for maximum effect. The anger is real. The expression of it is chosen. As Seneca wrote to Lucilius, we suffer more in imagination than in reality. The strategic processor converts that imagination into strategic fuel. What life looks like at level 4 is categorically different from the levels below. Conflict becomes leverage. The man at level 1 is destroyed by conflict. The man at level 2 is corroded by it. The strategic processor uses it. Every confrontation becomes information. Every opponent's emotional state is a variable he's reading and responding to with cold precision. Pressure becomes performance. The level 4 man functions better under duress than in comfort, not because he enjoys suffering, because he's trained his response to high-stakes situations until pressure is a state that sharpens him rather than fractures him. And here's the asymmetry principle that governs every level 4 interaction. When you're calm and your opponent is emotional, you hold every advantage in the exchange. Every single one. Their thinking is compromised, their communication is reactive, their decisions are being made by their nervous system instead of their mind. Yours aren't. You're seeing the whole board while they're chasing the last move. That asymmetry and conflict is decisive. Julius Caesar understood this at a level that still hasn't been fully appreciated. After his decisive victory at the Battle of Pharsalus, the moment that effectively ended the Roman Republic and set Caesar on the path to absolute power, he made a move that confused everyone around him. He granted clemency to the commanders who had fought against him, Pompey's allies, men who had led legions against him. He pardoned them, welcomed them back, treated them publicly as if the war had never happened. This wasn't kindness, it wasn't mercy. It was a calculated emotional move designed to achieve two specific outcomes. First, neutralize future threats by converting enemies into men who owed him their lives and therefore could never comfortably move against him. Second, build loyalty through psychological debt, the most durable form of alliance available, because it operates through conscience rather than contract. Caesar processed his victory, an emotional high of historic magnitude, and converted it into a strategic instrument before anyone around him had stopped celebrating. The internal scaffolding of level 4 requires one specific capability: the processing delay. A mental protocol between trigger and response, not a pause born of uncertainty. A deliberate gap that you insert, trained, automatic over time, between what you feel and what you do with it. This is the mechanism that Marcus Aurelius mastered and the suppressor never builds. Build the delay first, the weaponization follows. Think of the person who betrayed you. The level 1 man screams at them. The level 2 man ignores them while his blood pressure spikes. The level 4 man smiles, thanks them for the lesson, and waits for the exact moment their emotional instability makes them vulnerable to a counterstrike. That is the power of the processing delay. But there's a danger at this level that must be named. Some men who reach level 4 become cold in ways that destroy genuine alliances. They become so attuned to the strategic use of emotional energy that they deploy it everywhere, including with people who deserve authenticity, not calculation. They treat every relationship as a board position. They optimize every interaction for leverage. This is a misapplication of the framework. A level 4 man doesn't hate, he uses kindness, like a chess piece to put his enemies in debt. The man who can't switch off the cold calculus is as limited as the man who can't switch it on. Level 5 is not for everyone. Most men should not try to reach it without earning the levels below. At level 5, the emotion is felt, processed, and then filed. It doesn't interrupt function, under any circumstance. This requires immediate clarification, because the most common misreading of what level 5 looks like will send you toward the wrong model entirely. This is not psychopathy. A psychopath doesn't feel. A Spartan chooses not to react. One is a birth defect, the other is a hard-won weapon. Level 5 is the opposite of psychopathy. The emotion is present, felt at full intensity, and then processed and set aside with a speed and completeness that makes it functionally invisible to everyone watching. This is the result of decades of work, not the absence of feeling, but the mastery of it. What life looks like at level 5 is something the herd has never been in proximity to, and when they are, they sense it without being able to name it. Total operational clarity under extreme pressure. Decisions made in the middle of a crisis are indistinguishable, in quality, in speed, in strategic soundness, from decisions made in complete calm. The crisis doesn't degrade the processing. The emergency doesn't introduce noise. The storm arrives, and the man at level 5 is the same man he was before the storm. The Spartan model for this wasn't theoretical, it was engineered over centuries. Spartan warriors weren't emotionless. Every account of Spartan battle culture makes this explicit. They grieved their dead. They felt fear before combat. What was different is that they were conditioned to feel and fight simultaneously, to grieve and hold the line at the same time. The emotion didn't pause the function, and the function didn't require the absence of the emotion. They coexisted. At Thermopylae, Leonidas didn't ignore his fear. He made it sit in the corner while he commanded his legions. You must do the same with your social anxiety, your professional rage, and your personal grief. They can exist, but they no longer get a vote in your actions. The Stoics gave this the most precise philosophical formulation available. They called it the Hegemonikon, the governing faculty, the sovereign part of the mind that remains in command even when the body is in crisis, even when the emotions are at maximum intensity, even when external conditions are catastrophic. As Epictetus taught in his discourses, whatever happens in the world outside, The Hegemonikon is inviolable. It can't be taken. It can only be surrendered. Marcus Aurelius returned to it constantly in his private writings, this governing faculty that no external force can compromise. Level 5 is the embodiment of the Hegemonikon made operational. The social reality at this level is something that others experience before they understand it. The man at level 5 isn't easily manipulated because the emotional levers that manipulation requires aren't exposed. He isn't easily provoked because provocation requires a reaction, and the reaction is gated by a processing system that filters before it fires. He isn't easily read because the interior state isn't broadcast through micro-expressions, vocal shifts, the subtle postural changes that allow anyone paying attention to track where you are emotionally in real time. He creates a natural power differential by virtue of being opaque. You can't leverage what you can't access. You can't destabilize what you can't read. And the people around a level 5 man feel it, the sense that they're dealing with someone operating from a position they can't fully see. The cost of this level is real, and it shouldn't be minimized. Isolation is the tax you pay for being untouchable. Not because the level 5 man has no warmth or connection available to him, but because the reactive can't sustain proximity to someone who operates this way. The opacity is unsettling. The composure is threatening. The people who needed your reactivity, who needed to be able to read you, to predict you, to feel the normal human friction of someone who responds to provocation in the expected ways, will find this threatening. They'll call it cold. They'll call it detached. They'll sometimes call it arrogant. And they won't be entirely wrong about what they're sensing, but the final truth about level 5 must be stated clearly. Spartan coldness isn't the absence of humanity. It's humanity compressed into pure function. The love is there. The loyalty is there. The connection is available. But none of it is allowed to compromise the function. The man at level 5 cares and performs without allowing the caring to fracture the performance. That's the distinction, and that's the level. Here's the single truth you take from this. Your emotional state is either your weapon or your cage. There is no neutral ground. Every reaction you give is either serving you or serving whoever is watching. The majority watching this are at level 2 or level 3. The suppressor who believes the lid is discipline. The aware fighter who has the insight but not the sovereign blueprint. If that's where you are, that's the first thing you needed to know. Because awareness of the level is the first move. Subscribe. The architecture of the sovereign mind goes deeper than this.